Everybody else, he has the ball. Go away.
He's got a bobble. Mate, he's got
The call had barely come in. Firearms officers arrive at a synagogue in Manchester. In front of them is chaos. A man with a knife, terrified worshippers behind him, and no time to think. It's the moment every firearms officer is trained for. And then the trigger is pulled. In this episode, we step inside the world of Britain's armed firearms officers, the men and women trained to make life or death decisions in seconds. In an unprecedented exclusive interview, we hear from someone who lives with that responsibility, who knows what it's like to carry the weight of the weapon. Someone who's been involved in some of the most high-profile operations in recent history. Welcome to the Crime Agents. Welcome back to the show with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Bassett.
Before we get into it, I wanted to give you all a little teaser of what you're about to hear. Britain's firearms officers live and work in the shadows. They are trained to act, forbidden to talk. You rarely hear their voices. They are bound by trust, camaraderie and secrecy. But today, we speak to a man named Will, who until recently was a sergeant in the Met's Specialist Firearms Command. That's known as MO19. He was one of the first officers on the scene of the Westminster Bridge attack in 2017, when Khalid Massoud killed 5 people when he drove his car into crowds and stabbed and murdered PC Keith Palmer. Will was also on the operation where his colleague and friend, Officer NX121, shot and killed Chris Kaba. This led to the most controversial murder case in recent history, and is the reason Will chose to leave the job he loved. We start by discussing this month's terror attack at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, when Jihad al-Shami killed 1 and injured 3 others. The attacker, who was trying to get into the synagogue, was wearing a suicide vest when the firearms officers arrived. It turned out to be fake, but the officers didn't know that, and they opened fire. Al-Shami was killed, but one of the bullets killed an innocent worshipper. I started off by asking Will what would have been going through the minds of the officers who responded to terror.
Listen, it's stressful.
Yeah.
The stress starts before you get to the incident. The stress is en route to the incident, where you're eager for information that will enable you to make good decisions when you turn up. Very often that information is just not forthcoming. And I remember when I, certainly my experience of deploying to an Operation Plato incident in London.
Plato is responding as if it is a marauding terror attack, basically.
Yeah, so I guess it's in simple terms, it's Neil will know more about this stuff than me. It's the button that gets pressed where you think it's a credible marauding terrorist attack, be that a marauding terrorist firearms attack or something slightly more low tech. The point is that where it's deemed to be credible, and in the case of an incident like Manchester or the one that I attended, I would suggest it doesn't take long for it to be obvious that it is credible. Then that button gets pressed and, all kinds of processes kick in and resources get freed and all the rest of it. But of course, as you're en route to the incident, you're not aware of that necessarily. To give you some indication of the kind of chaos, which I think is relatively unavoidable, that you endure en route to an incident, for the incident I was involved in, so the Westminster Bridge terror attack. At the outset, it was a confusing picture, because you basically had a road traffic collision involving pedestrians, lots of them, on the south side of the river. So that was being run on the Lambeth radio link. But then you had an incident of, a potential firearms incident on the Westminster side at the House of Parliament itself, which is being run on another link. And it's not immediately obvious that those two things are linked, in stressful, busy control rooms and that kind of stuff. It's all It's all a process of just trying to manage that chaos.
So, well, not very many people would have been in a police car at speed. So just describe what it's like sitting in a car with your colleagues. How many colleagues are in that car? Blue lights and two turns going. How many radios are you listening to? They're blaring at the same time. Your ears will be tuned to it. But to a member of the public, I would suggest that would be almost impossible for you to concentrate on any of that without training.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit trite, but the training really does kick in. It's probably an overused phrase, but it's really true. There's no doubt it's stressful, even when you're used to it. And I mean, human beings have a capacity to normalise anything, don't they, really? But en route to a major incident like that, where the stakes are high immediately because there are casualties, that the Operation Plato button, if it hasn't immediately been pressed, it's going to be pressed pretty soon. In an armed response vehicle in London, and again, forgive me, I take a London-centric view of these things really, just because that's my experience base. But you'll have 3 officers in a conventional armed response vehicle. You have the driver, an advanced driver, because you're driving fast vehicles. The driver's only role is to get from A to B safely. It's obviously a huge risk to the public to be cutting about in a 3-litre Beamer. Packed with kit. It's heavy. It's potentially extremely dangerous. So I think it's really wise to only burden the driver with getting to the destination safely. You also have a navigator in the map, in the back of the vehicle. They often get called maps for obvious reasons. So they are navigating to the scene. So they have to have a fairly good general knowledge of the arterial routes. The area that they cover. They also, on a conventional armed response vehicle, they also dish out the long arm, so the carbine, the big gun that firearms officers carry. Firearms officers in the UK, certainly armed response vehicle officers, will carry a secondary weapon, so a sidearm, but they'll also have a primary weapon. But for the most part, with a few exceptions, the primary weapon is locked in the safe in the car. Which is kind of in the boot of the vehicle and adapted. The seat folds down, and one of the navigator's jobs is not only to get the driver there, give them instructions to where they're going, but also to safely, at speed, dish out those guns. So that's the navigator's job. In the instance of the Westminster Bridge terror attack, I was deploying from just south of the river, so not far. So there wasn't actually that long duration to get particularly stressed or overawed at the magnitude of what you're going to. It's basically just over Lambeth Bridge.
It's probably still going on as you're going there.
Yeah, to some extent, certainly. Yeah. Certainly the real platinum 10 minutes first aids and all that kind of stuff. Was all still very much going on.
The actual incident from start to finish was 89 seconds.
It was very quick. It was a protection officer who was in the vicinity who actually shot Masood, or Adrian Elms, to give him his former name. But the first armed response vehicle was there in under 60 seconds.
Wow.
Which is an extraordinary response, I think, by anyone's standards.
That is, yeah.
Just to finish the point about the roles in the vehicle, because I think it's important. The real acutely stressful position in the vehicle going to an incident like that is the operator seat, because it's the operator who is juggling those radios, listening to 3, 4, perhaps 5 busy radio channels at the same time. Particularly an incident like that, it's going to be loud and disorientating.
And what was your role in that attack?
I was operating on that day. Okay. To be perfectly honest, we were there so quickly, and we were so close to the incident itself. There wasn't much time to assimilate information.
I bet.
And listen, it's as I say, it's a stressful business. However, you, as trite as it sounds, again, you're trained to manage that stress. And we were there very quickly. I remember going over Lambeth Bridge, at speed, onto, I guess it would be Millbank, and just people were running away along the pavement, running away from the House of Parliament, and looked pretty petrified. They've obviously not only witnessed probably the vehicle hitting pedestrians and then the murder of Keith Palmer, but they've probably also witnessed the shooting itself, which is all, incredibly scary for an ordinary member of the public. So people were running along, we were driving towards it. I remember a guy running over the riverside pavement, the near side, the offside pavement, and I thought he was carrying a couple of bags in each hand, like luggage. Yeah. And I remember thinking, this is shit time to be carrying your luggage, to your hotel or whatever. And then I realised he had kids. He just grabbed his kids, and he had 2 in one hand and 1 in the other, and he was carrying them like a suitcase, which is, of course, exactly what you would do. You would just grab them, and comfort is not a priority in that moment, is it? Just get them out of there. So listen, I could go on, but it's stressful. It's stressful because you want really good information about subjects, how many there are, descriptions, what they're doing, what they're saying, what weapons they've got. If they're on the move, you want information about where they're headed. You want any information you can get around casualties, people that are already injured, extent of injuries, all that kind of stuff. And we just didn't have that. We just rock up and just kind of make do, move across the ground as tactically as you can, and then just see what you've got and try and deal with it. And again, as cheesy as it may sound, your training, it does kick in. And
so put us in your shoes, Will. You get to the scene now. You come out of the car. What are you seeing? What you're confronted with?
Well, at that incident particularly, I remember hitting the curb hard. I remember what we called originality at its best. We called the 60-second car, because its only job was to get to a premises in that crucial government security zone area, within 60 seconds. They were already there. There were basically 2 groups of people in Old Palace Yard. There was one group which was larger, and everyone was huddled over someone who clearly had been injured. It didn't take me long to figure out that was Keith.
PC Keith Palmer.
Yes. And then there was another guy who had a couple of people around him, who was also clearly injured. I'll be honest, I didn't make the leap in that moment that that was a terrorist that had been neutralised. I didn't know who it was. My colleagues kind of made sure there was a bit of firearms cover on the whole area, because at that point we didn't know how many attackers there were. In fact, for quite a long time at that incident, the information was suggesting that there were multiple attackers and that a few were in the Palace of Westminster itself, right? Which is why
we locked down the palace for some considerable time.
Yes, exactly.
Which I believe the Commissioner was made aware of by several parliamentarians.
Your insights on that level of things would be fascinating. It was very much on the ground perspective that I had, and we didn't know how many attackers there were at that moment. We made sure that immediate area was safe, which is, that's the first thing you do. You've got to have a safe working area. And when that was the case, it was all about prioritising that, saving life and limb and cracking on with first aid and that kind of stuff. I remember my colleagues going to Keith. They took over first aid on Keith because we have firearms officers have additional medic training.
Yeah.
And also enhanced kits.
Yeah.
Use of oxygen, hemostatic gauzes, tourniquets, all that kind of stuff. So they got going on Keith. I started to assess the other male.
This was the terrorist, Khalid Masood.
Who I realised I can't, to be honest, Annie, I can't remember exactly how it happened, but it became fairly obvious from what people who had been there, which was the diplomatic and parliamentary protection guys.
Right.
They said what happened. It was also really obvious that he had holes in his chest, so he'd been shot. So, I made that leap relatively quickly. And then it's, this is really where training kicks in, because, the temptation to kind of have an emotional reaction to that situation is always there. I can't remember when I ascertained that it was the attacker and that he'd been the one to injure Keith. But during the course of giving first aid, I definitely realised it.
How does that feel? Because it might sound odd to people that you're trying to save the life of a terrorist, but
it's against your instincts. Isn't
that is the training.
He's a cretinous individual, right?
Yeah.
An absolute. I don't know what I can get away with on the podcast, but an absolute piece of shit, right?
Yeah.
Like a nasty, nasty guy. And I wasn't even aware of the extent of the carnage that he'd created on the bridge itself.
Right.
Just ploughing over members of the public. And listen, in other countries in the world, I was very aware that he'd have probably been finished off by the the police officer with a 9mm SLP on his thigh. That would have been a fairly acceptable thing to do, and I can't say it didn't cross my mind. However, listen, this is where the professionalism kicks in, right? This is a bloke who has done something grotesque, but legally, if not morally, he has a right to life. The threat was gone. The bloke had been shot. He's no threat whilst he's getting CPR. So the fearsome responsibility for the police officers there, not just me, was to try and get him back and stick him before a judge and jury. Really, I just remember feeling incredibly angry that he caused the whole thing, frankly. And he was just a disgusting bloke. I could, he stunk. And I just remember thinking, you really are the most depraved individual I could imagine. Which I know doesn't sound very sympathetic, but he just murdered my colleague.
I'm not sure you should be sympathetic.
Well, precisely, yeah, exactly.
I remember I took over armed policing 2 weeks before the two terrorists killed Lee Rigby. And I remember I was handing over South East London on that day to my successor, and the commander of 19 rang up and said, "I know you're not in the chair yet, boss, but you need to know we've just shot someone." And I went up to Lehman Street to hook up with him. And by the time I got to Lehman Street, I was shown footage of the ARV that was first on scene, who had guns pointed at them by the terrorists, who had had to shoot the terrorists. So the terrorists had made these police officers shoot them, and then immediately give life-saving treatment to the two terrorists, save their lives and put them. It's one of my proudest moments as a British police officer, because I think you're right. Had it been America, they'd have had 100 bullets in them.
Oh,
instead, their lives were saved, and they got to face some justice.
There's just that. Yeah, I mean, it's a fact.
So your thoughts are more understandable to the public, I think, than what we're actually trained, what you were trained to do.
Well, you're as you know, you constantly have this value that, well, this approach that we use the least amount of force necessary to get the job done. And I think we, on the whole, in spite of certain narratives that exist out there, I think we do that remarkably well. But yeah, I reflect on it, and it does give me a huge amount of pride in the kind of police that we are, and the kind of policing that that we propagate in the UK and that we've developed, ever since 1829, I guess, because it was against my instincts.
I bet it was.
And which is not to say that, I was behaving particularly remarkably, because I mean, if anything, it was probably just that I had the least dynamic entry of all the guys in my car onto Old Palace Yard, and I kind of got to the, I didn't get the chance to go and do my best for Keith. But I remember being disgusted by this individual, but I remember feeling a strong obligation to do my best for him. There's a photo that was doing the rounds afterwards. It was in a lot of the papers, of me leaning over his body, and I'm pointing at one of my non-arm response colleagues. And this is how, and this may sound absurd, but this is how kind of well drilled the first aid protocols and the training is and all the rest of it. In that moment, I was essentially bollocking the probably extremely nice and professional dude, police officer who was there before me doing CPR.
Yeah.
I was basically bollocking him for his CPR being not very effective.
Wow.
Which, I say with a bit of hesitation, because that sounds like an absurd thing to do, but it's so ingrained in you that if you switch into that first aid mode, that dynamic, aggressive, highly effective first aid, platinum 10 minutes treatment that you need to give someone who has, for example, got gunshot wounds. I was locked in, and I was on a mission to get that bloke in front of a judge and jury. And then I had, we talked about this before, but I had this, I kind of look back on it and absolutely wince. And I got, the old police kind of gallows humour afterwards, got a bit of shit for this afterwards. But I remember, I don't know why it popped into my mind as I was doing chest compressions on this guy, but somewhere I'd heard that the last of the human senses to go was your hearing.
Right.
And although this guy was showing no signs of life, I thought, and it seemed the only option at the time, but I've just leant into his ear and I basically nicked him. I've nicked him for attempt murder. And he had the full shebang, Neil. He got a full caution. Like, literally, I just thought, if the last thing you ever hear is the full shebang, rule of law, procedure, you're getting it. You're gonna meet your maker with the UK police caution ringing in your ears. And it sounds like I'm making light of it, and I'm absolutely not.
No.
It just seemed an entirely natural thing to do at the time. Of course, that was spun, over a coffee the morning after. That was, I'm forever the guy that nicked the dead bloke.
The gallows humour in this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing, right?
Especially in the firearms unit.
It's a thing, and it's don't even get me started on that. It's a survival mechanism for people who, for whom the wear and tear on their mind and body is brutal. The daily anaesthetic load on our armed officers, police officers generally, but our armed officers in particular.
Do you know, I was going to come to this later, actually, Will, but since you kind of brought it up, the Louise Casey report into the Met heavily criticised the firearms unit, and they said that they were a deeply troubling, toxic culture. What do you make of that assessment, given what you just told us?
It's not a good look at the minute to appear defensive of any process which sheds light on areas that need some change. And I have to say, I've never met Louise Casey, although I did bump into coming out the lift at Scotland Yard. at one point. She nearly knocked the coffee out of my hand, but it didn't. I didn't make the final print. But I never met her. Listen, I have an uneasy relationship with the Casey review. I have read the whole thing. I've not read it recently. I'll focus, if I may, on the CO19 Specialist Firearms Command aspect, because that, really is the area where I feel like I can bring some insights. I think there was a lot of hearsay, and I think there was a lack of fact checking on a lot of the things that she was, or the team working on her behalf, were bringing, particularly in relation to 19. Now, Specialist Firearms Command, and this is true of policing generally across the UK, is clearly not above reproach. Very, very far from it. But I think Baroness Casey's team, certainly in relation to Specialist Firearms Command, I think they tended to interview disgruntled people who really had nothing good to say. Now, absolutely, those voices were valid and needed to be listened to. But for me, it would only be fair and equitable to also speak to people who weren't disgruntled for whatever reason.
Well, so, just to play devil's advocate for a minute,
please do.
I was saying this to an old colleague of ours earlier on today. Louise is a friend of mine, and I do know her quite well, and I was given access to that report before it was published.
Okay.
Like you, there's a lot of stuff in that report that unfortunately I do agree with, and I was interviewed for it. The bit I didn't recognise at all, given that I was head of 19 for 14 months, 2013 to 2014, was 19. Now, I'm led to believe that what they did was the team sat in the bar at Gravesend and basically said, we'll be there all day. If you want to come and speak to us, come and speak to us. So your point about what normally happens in a situation like that is everyone who's got an axe to grind goes to the bar, and everyone else says nothing.
I think that's a really fair assessment. And I think there's something about policing, and this is a fault of policing, it can take a bit of a bomb shelter approach at times. A kind of, we're in it together, no one else understands, and we're just going to kind of shut the door and just get each other through it, frankly. And I do understand that because I've been there.
Which is also not unique to 19. It's
not
it's
unique
a policing problem, but it's definitely an elite unit.
I think with 19 there's I absolutely am not qualified to speak on behalf of 19, other than the fact I was there for a while. But there are so many far more experienced and frankly capable people who could speak on behalf of 19 who do a better job than me. However, I was there for a while. I think there is a reluctance at 19 particularly to engage. There's a reluctance to engage with the press. Yeah. There's a reluctance to engage with the community. Some of that is, I think, a legitimate fear over issues like anonymity. Some of it is I guess, a bit of and again, I'm not suggesting this is completely illegitimate, but I think sometimes there's a bit of a feeling of people just won't understand, therefore what's the point? So your characterisation that maybe elements of 19 slightly shot themselves in the foot by not being proactive and speaking to Baroness Casey's team, I think that's a fair assessment. But I think, I could give you 5 names now, clearly I won't. I could give you 5 names of females. They won't be very happy. Of females who are, credible operators within Specialist Firearms Command, who I've had personal conversations with since the Casey review, and who've said to me, I wish she'd have come and spoken to me.
Oh,
because I would give a very different account of how the department has treated me. Now, again, just that caveat that I'm going to say as often as I can, Specialist Firearms Command is not beyond reproach. There are areas for improvement, right? However, I think many of the views or many of the suggestions made in the Casey review of Specialist Firearms Command, well, exactly that. Actually, they're not suggestions. It's presented as incontrovertible fact. Somehow, there are references to conversations and hearing things, and it's presented as objective, indisputable. Just because it carries Baroness Casey's name, frankly, it doesn't. And I appreciate she's a formidable woman. She'd eat me for breakfast. But the point I'm making
definitely
is,
would, Will.
It's not, it's not objective, indisputable fact just because it's in the Casey review.
I'm wondering how you feel, Will, about how police officers are held to account. Obviously, they are highly accountable, but they are held to a higher standard than any other officers that I know of. For example,
Firearms officers are held to a high standard.
Just talking about NX 121. You, of course, know him. You were there on that night. How do you feel about the way that played out, and how did it affect you? How did it affect the unit? Take me in that room in the days and weeks after he was charged with murder.
I still think to this day it's one of the most absurd decisions I came across whilst policing, is the decision to name NX 121 publicly. In answer to your question, I think it's hard to encapsulate all those feelings and emotions in a few sentences, but my initial reaction was pride, not because a man had been killed. I don't think Chris Kaba was a nice individual by any means, but I certainly won't be rejoicing in anyone dying. That being said, it is what it is. Huge pride in my colleagues, huge pride in NX 121, who under extraordinary pressure did his job. And that's just three words, which, come out very easily.
Yeah.
But in that environment, with all the pressures that firearms officers have, and all the pressures and, frankly, all the shitstorm that they know is likely to come should they take that fearsome action and end up shooting someone, that he still did his job to protect his colleagues and himself, but his colleagues particularly, just fills me with enormous pride. I can't even begin to describe to you the pride I feel at that. And again, I'm on sensitive ground. I have to be careful what I say because, ultimately I don't want to be triumphalist because someone was killed.
Of course.
However, I have enormous pride. It didn't take long for that pride to turn to anger. Anger in the way that NX 121 was treated. Anger in the lack of nuance and maturity and balance in much of the narrative that was playing out in the media, and particularly social media. That won't surprise you to know. Really divisive, incendiary, reckless things were being said in the weeks afterwards.
They were calling him a racist murderer, basically.
They were, but I have a platform now. Thanks you both for this opportunity. But I have a bit of an opportunity to kind of call some of that out, really, because this is another feature of police officers. They're mindful of the fact that they are serving. They can't be deemed to be particularly skewed or biased. They have to be impartial in all things. They can't do anything which might bring the service and the commissioner into disrepute. And I feel often like I know they feel like they don't have a voice. But when we talk about some of the things that are being said about NX 121 in the weeks after the Kaba shooting, we're not talking about obscure keyboard warriors, you know, who are always going to spout shit online, frankly.
Yeah.
We're talking about grown-ups. We're talking about, elected politicians. You know, we're talking about CEOs of prominent charities. There was a guy who's a very vocal guy called Ben Lindsay, CEO of Power the Fight charity, who've done some incredible work. I mean, this guy, who, to be fair, I've never met, I mean, he was repeatedly, after that incident, publicly referring to it brazenly as a murder. Nobody had the facts in that moment. Nobody knew the full story. And to risk that crucial trust, legitimacy, all those things there's so much work for the Met to do in that space for people to be safe and for policing to be more effective. You know, never mind just NX121 and what's fair in the way we treat him and fair trial and all the rest of it, even just for the sake of keeping policing on the road and effective. And you know, I just find it extraordinary, and it made me really angry. Allied to that was, an underwhelming response from senior police officers, if I'm honest.
Yeah. I heard a lot of that.
You know,
Is this publicly and privately? Because publicly they're sometimes in a bad position because of the IOPC.
well, they are.
I wanted to ask you how the IOPC and the Met dealt with you as a team.
What, in the immediate, the post-incident procedure?
I can guess. Well, not just the post-incident procedure, but you said this went on for
Start
weeks.
off with that.
Well, I'll speak freely. I mean, the IOPC and the IPCC, as it was when I joined the police, I'm not stupid. They perform a crucial function in UK policing. They are that crucial counterweight that's needed to keep policing accountable. I recognise that. However, they're ineffective. They're just not very competent investigators, and I'm treating them like a homogenous block. I appreciate that. However, I am speaking from experience. So often it feels to officers, to former colleagues of mine, who, and that's the scandalous thing, in spite of all this, the guys and girls are still out there. They're still out there. They'll be going to jobs tonight. You could have another Chris Kaba-esque shooting tonight, and the officers going to it would be just as vulnerable. And they feel the pressure of this. Too often, in my eyes, the IOPC seem far more concerned about getting their scalp than they do about actual learning and development and improvement of policing and police procedures. That's just my take on it. Clearly I don't speak in any kind of official capacity anymore.
I think you've earned the right to have an opinion.
Well, I would agree. I think I have. And my opinion is the IOPC, again, although they perform a crucial function in UK policing, the IOPC in its current guise is not fit for purpose, would be my... But to be honest, that I think that's true of the whole accountability system generally.
Well, you're right. It's the third variation of the IOPC in my 30-year career.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And they have to keep changing because they keep being told they're not credible enough. They're not credible enough for the police or the public, and therefore, you're right. Nobody has more to gain from a really effective IOPC than the police themselves.
Completely agree.
Well, I'm really curious. Given what happened to NX121, and obviously the ripple effect that had on armed policing, I mean, you're speaking here so openly yourself because you decided to leave after that. Why would anyone, knowing what happened to NX121, knowing that if a firearms officer turns up to a job and does the job that they're trained to do, that they could be in the dock for murder, why would anyone want to do that job?
I mean, it's something that's caused me to lie in bed at night and wonder the same thing. I'll give you a few reasons why they do. Firstly, because it's a uniquely satisfying job. I mean, it's hard to describe. I mean, policing generally is an extraordinary job. and I appreciate I'm biased in this, but I think armed policing, firearms policing is particularly extraordinary. There are just so many component parts of policing that in armed policing they just kind of coalesce in that one incident. You know, the strength of intel, use of force, preemptive strike, trust and legitimacy, or lack of it, legal frameworks, powers and policy, APP, all these, as I say, these component parts of policing coalesce in this one moment, and often this very brief moment, these milliseconds. And I just don't know if there's another role like it.
Do you miss it?
Yeah, aspects of it, definitely. Yeah, it's uniquely satisfying. It's an incredibly exciting job, as you'd expect. There are down times, but you're in that 3 or 4 car convoy going across London to a job. Maybe it's a proper, really credible job. Shots have been fired, or maybe it's an Operation Plato type job, and it's all coming on top. You're juggling, loads of radio channels and the mobile phones going. With the detective in the case wants a word about something, and the tactical firearms commander, so the inspector who's kind of orchestrating things. They want to chat, and it's just. Never mind going to an incident where you're soon going to be pointing a gun at someone. It's just an incredibly addictive environment, and it's the perfect showcase for showcasing the perfect showcase for skills that you've worked really hard to develop. Is the long short of it. So it's uniquely satisfying. It's exciting. It's also, and this sounds a bit cheesy, but most police officers will tell you that they join to help people, and overused phrase, but I think 99% of the time it's absolutely true. And I found, or certainly from my experience, the firearms policing was just the perfect environment to, in a very, very real, often visceral, raw way, to help people. I've been to aggravated burglaries, where people have been burgled and the suspects have had guns. And just the look of relief when you turn up to that job.
Yeah, I bet.
It's just completely addictive. It's like every cell in their body has been praying for your arrival, and then you manage to get there as part of a well-trained unit who are motivated and skilled to make a difference and to help out. It's just a really compelling, brilliant job. And the guys and girls that do it are remarkable. They're extraordinary people. Right? I am so full of respect for them.
One of the things I was going to ask you, are you worried because of the way you were treated, the way you've described? Not for the first time in my career have I heard firearms officers describing that. I'm worried that somebody might hesitate at a time where that might be life-threatening for a member of the public themselves or a colleague because of what they might anticipate that's coming. Or do you think they're able to put that behind them for the moment that they're doing because of their professionalism and training, or are you worried about that?
If someone is still out and about on the streets of London and beyond, carrying a gun, I'm very, very confident that they've had that quiet, contemplative time to themselves where they've weighed it all up. And if they're out and about with a gun, they will not hesitate. They will do what needs to be done. But I am fearful nothing has actually changed yet. We need legislation and procedures to change, because the reality is, if there was a similar scenario tonight, the same thing could happen. So I guess that would be the main thrust that I want to close on. Actually, in terms of law, nothing has changed, and officers still aren't protected in the way they should be. Not protected from scrutiny, but protected from the ravages of an unfair, skewed system.
Will, thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Will.
What do you make of that, Neil?
Well, I don't know. What did you make of it? 20 years as a crime journalist, 30 years as a cop. It was very hard to ask him a question because you just couldn't take your eyes or ears off what he was saying. I mean, I joined the job in 1992. It reminded me of something I've said to firearms officers since. If I'd had to carry a weapon as a British police officer, a gun, a lethal weapon, I would never have joined. I don't think I could ever do what they do. And it's remarkable to hear that kind of first-hand experience. I'm pretty emotional as well.
You just never hear anyone speak on that level because, as I said in my opening, this is a world shrouded in mystery and secrecy. They never talk. They have this like code of silence. They don't want the world or us to know what they do. And then we've just heard from the horse's mouth the inner secrets and the inner workings of one of the most extraordinary police units you'll ever come across.
Yeah, well, of course, I managed them for 2013 to 2014.
How are they to manage? Because they can be a strident bunch.
Well, you heard what I said to Will. I mean, I think it's an alpha bunch of people who need alpha leadership in order to function. And I think I said it. They shoot themselves in the foot sometimes with this this lack of transparency and secrecy. I know why. There's a couple of reasons. One is the anonymity is really important to them. I mean, some of them have never told their family what they actually do in policing. Their neighbours don't know. So if they're outed, as the judge outed NS121, you've suddenly got people looking at you in a completely different way. Some people not very comfortable with it at all. I found them the most misunderstood organisation within policing in many respects, not just by the public, but by senior officers as well. There's a very strong saying. You and I both know Tony Long, who was the firearms officer involved in the shooting of Azelle Rodney, and Tony had to stand trial for that. And he wrote a book called Lethal Force, which is still on sale today. And in that book, he quotes, which is variously ascribed to people like Churchill and Kipling and George Orwell. There are various people who said this, but it is effectively goes along the lines that we sleep peacefully in our beds because rough men are ready to do violence on our behalf. It's not very politically correct, but it's from the 30s. Yeah. And it was about the military saving us, from, people invading our country. It was about our soldiers. That's what it was originally developed for that. It is the perfect phrase for armed policing if you include men and women, because we have some outstanding female firearms officers these days. But people don't understand what they do. And I said, we've got to understand that only about, I think, when I retired, it was between 12 and 14% of British police officers carry a weapon. Yeah. They do thousands and thousands of firearms operations a year. In the year that Chris Kaba was shot, 21,000 firearms operations took place, and the trigger was pulled 5 or 6 times. I mean, that is a remarkable statistic. It shows how professional they are. It shows how difficult that job is. Imagine how many times the gun is drawn and pointed at someone where a split-second decision could change, between the taking of a life and the saving of a life. I mean, it is a remarkable thing they do, and they just do not get any kind of understanding or credit for it. They should invite more people like you in, as we did with Panorama back then, to show exactly what they do, how they're trained, how professional they are, and what's the reason why there are so few police shootings in British police.
Yeah, I mean, when I got invited in, it was basically because of what happened to NX121, and they wanted to show how professional this unit was. I think kind of what
did you think?
Well, I was massively impressed. I was massively impressed by the professionalism. I mean, they were absolute machines, and we went along to their training, and we did this thing called the judgment range to try, and effectively it puts you into this scenario where you're going around. It's like a computer game, right? But you're going in, and it's like a real life situation. And I remember mine was you're going into a school. All you've been told is that there's someone inside with a gun and shots are being fired. So I went in there and then kind of going through the doors, and you have to kind of say out loud what you're seeing. And then I turned the corner, and then I pulled the trigger, and I shot the wrong person. And I think that's probably quite common. Did you shoot the right person?
I shot the terrorist right between the eyes. Yeah. Just before I shot one of the children. And the chief firearms instructor, and then afterwards, did they get you to debrief what you had
Yeah,
seen?
yeah.
How well did you do with that?
Not well.
There's a thing called perceptual distortion. So bear in mind, we're playing a game.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the real thing, but this thing called perceptual distortion, that reptilian brain of ours, fight, flight, or freeze, unless you are very highly trained and very physically fit and very capable, what will happen to you when you're pointing a weapon at someone is your entire focus will be on the person and the end of your gun. Everything around you you'll start to lose hearing, you'll start to lose sight. It is very difficult to remember the exact thing that happened at the exact time immediately after the incident, which is why when they go into what they call the post-incident procedure, there is a very regimented way they go about that in order to get the best evidence. However, I mean, you heard Will, the way they're treated after doing the thing that, you know, most of us could never ever do, and I think you and I proved most of us could never ever do it.
Do that.
The way they're treated is as suspects, not witnesses.
Yeah, I think that's why Will chose to do it. I mean, you know, as well as I do, I've been trying to get Will on for months. He's probably the interview I've worked on the most since we started this podcast. And he took a lot of convincing, but I think really he explained there why he chose to do it. And it's because he's angry, in a way, about how the firearms police have been perceived. And he actually wanted to give us an insight into what it's actually like and how difficult that job is. And also the personal toll it takes on people like him. What is a massive shame is he's decided to leave MO19. Who knows what he's going to do in future, right? But isn't it a massive shame that because of what happened to his mate, NX121, and his colleague, that people like him are leaving that job now? I don't know about you, but I want him protecting us.
Yeah, I mean, you heard me ask him, I was really worried about how his colleagues might feel because of the treatment. And I was incredibly reassured by his response, which was effectively, if you choose to do that job and you choose to take your weapon, book your weapon out and go out on the streets, you're doing it because you know exactly what you're doing and you will be prepared, if necessary, to save a life by having to take one. And I'm kind of reassured that, you know, officers are not putting themselves at risk or the public at risk by not being up to the job because of the way we and the criminal justice system have treated them.
Well, I think just to give a bit of assurance, when I was in 19, like I was ever in 19, but when I was doing...
I'm sure they'd love to have you, particularly with your expense account.
No, don't mention that. Yeah. But when I was doing a documentary with them, shall I say, they were telling me how hard it is to recruit. And the thing about it is they're still getting lots of people applying, but a lot of people just aren't meeting the threshold and the standard that you need to get to. So, yes, there is a shortage of firearms officers in this country and in the Met at the moment because of the NX121 case. But I was quite reassured that from what I saw, everyone who did manage to get into that unit, they were at a massively high standard. And listen, I think it's also right to say that, yeah, it seems as though we're just saying, oh, how great are MO19, how great are the Met, blah, blah, blah. Listen, we hammer the police when they deserve to be hammered. And we did that, just a week or so ago when that panorama came out. We absolutely hammered them. But sometimes you do have to give credit where credit's due. And when you speak to people like Will, and when I've seen how they operate, you have to give them credit. Thanks for listening to The Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.